can stop inboxing me, y'all can stop making videos, y'all can stop doing whatever y'all doing if y'all ever thought somebody beat me up or did anything to me.
Stop using a dead man's name to come at me. That is what King Yella, one of Chicago's most unfiltered, most controversial, most outspoken OGs, is saying directly to Vaughn 1700 right now. And Chicago is paying attention because this beef touches something that goes way deeper than two rappers arguing on IG Live. Vaughn 1700 built his entire identity around King Vaughn's name. The Vaughn. The 1700s. Everything about his brand borrows from a man who is no longer here to co-sign it or deny it. And now Vaughn 1700 is using that borrowed credibility, that dead man's legacy, to make claims about King Yella. Specifically claiming that Big Jilla put hands on Yella. That Big Jill beat him. And King Yella, the same man who has sat across from some of Chicago's most dangerous figures without flinching, the same man who said King Vaughn was not human on camera and meant every word. King Yella looked directly into that camera and said, "Stop the sea. Big Jill never beat me. And you need to stop hiding behind Vaughn's name to come at me." Chicago just got really interesting. Stay locked in. This one goes deep. Now let us set the foundation properly. Because before we get into what King Yella said, before we break down every layer of this Vaughn 1700 situation, before we examine what this beef actually reveals about Chicago rap politics in 2026, we need to understand something fundamental about the world that produced all of these men. Because this is not just a social media argument between two Chicago rappers who have a problem with each other. This is a story about legacy, about ownership, about who has the right to carry a dead man's name and what responsibility comes with that right.
Somebody beat me up when I was little, when I was a child, when I was a kid. Well, y'all been whooped before.
King Yella is not a new figure in this story. He has been a part of Chicago rap's most controversial conversations for years. He has been on the King Yella show sitting across from some of the most significant voices in Chicago drill history, interviewing Big Mike, discussing the O-Block situation, weighing in on the Lil Durk federal case, addressing the Chief Keef and NBA Youngboy collab controversy. He has never been somebody who shies away from saying exactly what he thinks regardless of who might be uncomfortable with it. That is his brand. That is his credibility. That is the specific quality that makes people tune into his platform even when, maybe especially when, they disagree with what he is saying. And King Yella's relationship with King Vaughn specifically is one of the most complicated dynamics in recent Chicago rap history. Because Yella knew Vaughn. Not from a distance. Not through music or social media. He knew the man. He was present for conversations and moments and situations that the public never had full access to. And that proximity, that specific earned first-hand knowledge of who Vaughn actually was, is exactly what makes Yella's position in this Vaughn 1700 situation so significant. Because here is the thing about Vaughn 1700 that King Yella wants Chicago to understand. Vaughn 1700 built his entire public identity around King Vaughn's name without Vaughn ever having the opportunity to endorse that identity or reject it. The name itself, Vaughn 1700, is constructed entirely from King Vaughn's legacy. Vaughn 1700. Every element of that rap name points directly back to Vaughn Bennett. And in Chicago, where names carry enormous weight, where the block you claim and the people you associate with define your entire position in the ecosystem, taking a dead man's name as your brand is a statement. It is a claim. It is saying I am connected to this legacy and I deserve to carry it.
But Big Jilla ain't did it. That's for sure. So, for y'all that's falling for the okie doke, that's falling for.
And King Yella's argument, the argument he is making publicly and directly, is that Vaughn 1700 has not earned the right to make that claim, has not demonstrated the kind of genuine connection to Vaughn's actual world that would justify using his name as the foundation of an entire rap identity. And more specifically, that Vaughn 1700 is using that borrowed credibility to make moves in the Chicago rap landscape that the real Vaughn, the actual Vaughn Bennett who grew up in O-Block and built everything from nothing, the real Vaughn would never have sanctioned. Now let us talk about the Big Jilla situation specifically, because this is where the beef became impossible to ignore publicly. King Yella responded directly to Vaughn 1700 claiming that Big Jilla had punched him in an interview on the King Yella show. Vaughn 1700 went public with this claim, put it out there for Chicago and for the internet to consume, saying that Big Jilla had physically put hands on King Yella, that Yella had been touched, that somebody from Vaughn 1700 circle had gotten the better of one of Chicago's most outspoken OGs in a physical confrontation. And in Chicago, where physical credibility, where the reputation of being somebody who cannot be touched, who cannot be moved, who stands their ground regardless of the circumstances, in Chicago that kind of claim is not just gossip. It is not just drama. It is a direct attack on somebody's standing. It is an attempt to publicly diminish a person's credibility in a community where credibility is everything. Where you carry yourself physically and what people believe about how you carry yourself physically determines how seriously your words and your positions are taken. So when Vaughn 1700 put that claim out there, when he said Big Jilla beat King Yella, he was not just starting beef. He was attempting to rewrite the public narrative about who King Yella is and what King Yella represents in Chicago. He was trying to use a physical altercation to undermine everything Yella had built as a voice, as a platform, as somebody whose opinions on Chicago rap politics carry weight because of the reputation and the history he brings to those opinions. And King Yella was not going to let that stand. Could not let that stand. Because in a city like Chicago, silence in response to that kind of claim is its own statement. Silence says maybe it is true. Silence says I do not have an answer. Silence says the claim has enough validity that I cannot directly and forcefully deny it. And King Yella, whatever anybody thinks about his opinions, whatever controversies he has generated over the years, is not a man who responds to direct challenges with silence. Vaughn 1700 and King Yella went at each other on IG Live in a confrontation that shocked Chicago and went viral immediately. Because when these two men got on live together, when the argument that had been building through interviews and social media posts finally happened in real time, the energy was exactly what you would expect from a situation this charged. Raw. Unfiltered. Two men who had real grievances with each other's positions saying exactly what they thought with no PR management, no handler whispering in their ear to be careful, no safety net of prepared statements and talking points. And what came out of that live was the full picture of what this beef is actually about underneath the surface. Because it is not really about Big Jilla. It is not really about who punched who or whether that even happened the way Vaughn 1700 claimed. The Big Jilla situation is the match. The real fire, the thing that has been building for a long time, is about the question of King Vaughn's name and who has the right to use it and for what purposes. And King Yella, who has his own complicated feelings about Vaughn, who has said things about Vaughn publicly that Vaughn's fans found deeply controversial, who exists in a uniquely positioned relationship to Vaughn's legacy because he knew the man and has never pretended otherwise. King Yella is making a specific and important argument. He is saying that using Vaughn's name as a costume, as a brand, as a credibility shortcut, as a way to position yourself in the Chicago ecosystem without doing the actual work that Vaughn did to earn his position, that is disrespectful. Not to Yella specifically, but to Vaughn. And that argument, coming from somebody who has never been accused of being soft on Vaughn's legacy, who has said things about Vaughn that were far more controversial than anything Vaughn 1700 has ever said, that argument lands differently than it would coming from somebody in Vaughn's direct circle. Because Yella is not protecting Vaughn out of loyalty or grief. He is protecting the principle that a dead man's name deserves more respect than being used as a clout vehicle by somebody who wants credibility without accountability. King Yella also made statements suggesting the GDBD war in Iraq is over, and that statement, dropped in the middle of all of this Vaughn 1700 drama, added an entirely new dimension to the conversation. Because if the GDBD war is over, if Yella is saying that the foundational conflict that defined Chicago gang politics for decades has reached some kind of resolution, then what does that mean for the beef between him and Vaughn 1700? What does it mean for the broader landscape that Vaughn's name is being used to navigate? And who actually has the authority to make that declaration? Because the GDBD war declaration is not a small thing. In Chicago, that is not the kind of statement you make casually. That is not the kind of claim you put out there without understanding the weight of what you are saying and the reaction it is going to generate from every corner of the city that has been living inside that conflict for decades. And King Yella, whatever you think about his judgment in other areas, is not somebody who makes statements like that without knowing exactly what he is doing. So why did he say it in the middle of the Vaughn 1700 situation? Why connect those two things? The beef with Vaughn 1700 about Big Jilla and the declaration that the GDBD war is over, in the same moment. Because the connection is not accidental. The connection is the point. Because Vaughn 1700's entire brand exists inside a specific Chicago gang political framework. The Vaughn in his name is connected to a specific set of affiliations, a specific block, a specific side of the Chicago landscape. And when Yella declares that the war is over, when he says that the foundational conflict that gave those affiliations their meaning and their weight is done, he is pulling the ground out from underneath Vaughn 1700's entire credibility structure. Think about what that means specifically. If the GDBD war is over, if the conflict that defined the world that King Vaughn lived and died in has been resolved, then what exactly is Vaughn 1700 representing when he carries that name? What is he fighting for? What does his brand even mean in a post-war Chicago? Because the credibility that Vaughn 1700 has borrowed from King Vaughn's legacy is credibility that was earned in a specific context, a specific conflict, a specific set of circumstances that Vaughn navigated with his actual life on the line. And Yella is saying, that context is gone. That chapter is closed. And you are out here cosplaying in a uniform from a war that is over. Now let us talk about King Yella's own complicated relationship with King Vaughn's legacy. Because this is where the story gets layered in a way that most people covering this beef have not fully addressed. King Yella said in an interview that King Vaughn was the devil and he was not human, adding that he knew Vaughn in real life and seemed complicated in how he felt about discussing him. That statement, King Vaughn was the devil, he was not human, is one of the most discussed things Yella has ever said publicly. Vaughn's fans were outraged. Chicago reacted strongly. And yet Yella has never walked it back. Has never issued an apology or a clarification that softened the statement into something more palatable. And here is what makes that significant in the context of the Vaughn 1700 beef. Because King Yella is not coming at Vaughn 1700 from a position of being Vaughn's protector. He is not saying you are disrespecting somebody I loved and I am defending his honor. He is saying something more specific and more interesting than that. He is saying that you are using Vaughn's name as a vehicle for your own ambitions without the authenticity that would make that usage legitimate. And that argument, unlike a simple loyalty defense, cannot be dismissed by pointing out that Yella himself had complicated feelings about Vaughn. Because it is not about feelings. It is about authenticity. It is about whether the thing you are building on top of somebody's legacy has any real connection to what that legacy actually represented. And Vaughn 1700's credibility problem, the specific credibility problem that King Yella is putting his finger on, is that everything about his public identity is constructed rather than earned. The name is constructed. The association with Vaughn's world is constructed. The credibility that comes from carrying that name in Chicago is borrowed rather than built. And when you build a rap identity on a foundation of borrowed credibility and then use that borrowed credibility to make moves against real people who have real history in the city, eventually somebody is going to call that out. And King Yella called it out. Loudly. Directly. On his own platform and on IG Live and in interviews. Because Yella understands something about Chicago that Vaughn 1700 apparently has not fully reckoned with. In Chicago, your name is only as good as what you actually did. The stories only hold up if the people who were present can verify them. And when you build an identity around a man who can no longer speak for himself, who cannot confirm or deny your claims, who cannot say, yes, I know this person and they represent what I represented, you are operating on credit that can be called in at any moment by somebody who has the actual receipts. And King Yella has receipts. Not because he is Vaughn's ally or Vaughn's defender, but because he was present. He was in those spaces. He had those conversations. He knows the difference between somebody who genuinely came from that world and somebody who is wearing that world like a costume for the purposes of building a rap brand. Now let us address the Big Jilla piece one more time because the specifics of that claim matter beyond just the surface level drama. When Vaughn 1700 said Big Jilla beat King Yella, when he put that specific physical claim into the public discourse, he was doing something very deliberate. He was trying to establish a physical narrative about Yella that would undermine everything else Yella says and does publicly. Because in Chicago, if people believe you got touched, if people believe somebody physically got the better of you and you did not respond, everything else about your credibility comes into question. Your opinions, your platform, your ability to speak on Chicago politics with any authority. That is why Yella's response was so immediate and so direct. King Yella responded to Vaughn 1700's claim about Big Jilla putting hands on him, directly denying it on the King Yella show. Because letting that claim sit unanswered, even for a day, even for a few hours, would have allowed it to calcify into accepted narrative in the way that internet rumors always do when they are not immediately and forcefully challenged. Yella knew that, and he responded accordingly. And what Yella's response reveals about the deeper dynamic of this situation is that Vaughn 1700 is not just dissing Yella for personal reasons. He is attempting a specific strategic move. He is trying to use the Big Jilla claim to establish physical dominance in a beef where he cannot establish intellectual or historical dominance, because the facts of Chicago history and the reality of who actually knew Vaughn and who did not are not on his side. So instead of fighting on that terrain, instead of making the argument about legacy and authenticity and who has the right to carry Vaughn's name, he tried to shift the conversation to something more basic, something more primal, something that if believed would override everything else. And Yella refused to let the conversation be shifted, pulled it back, made it about exactly what it needs to be about. The question of whether Vaughn 1700's entire identity is built on a foundation that cannot support the weight he is trying to put on it. And that question, that fundamental question about authenticity and legacy and who gets to carry a dead man's name in Chicago, is the one that this entire city is now asking out loud because of this beef. And the answer that is emerging, the answer that King Yella is forcing into the conversation whether Chicago wanted to have it or not, is making some very specific people in the city very uncomfortable. From the space that exists when nobody challenges the constructed narratives. When nobody asks the hard questions about who actually has the right to carry certain names and certain legacies in a city that takes those things more seriously than almost any other place in America. And King Yella, by forcing this confrontation with Vaughn 1700, by refusing to let the Big Jilla claim sit unanswered, by putting the question of legacy and authenticity directly into the public conversation, has eliminated that ambiguity in a way that cannot be undone. And this is where King Vaughn's actual legacy enters the picture in the most important way. Because what Vaughn built, what he created with his music, with his storytelling, with a specific way he documented his life on record, was something that belonged to him completely. It was not transferable. It was not something that could be borrowed or inherited or passed down to somebody who was not there. The credibility of Crazy Story comes from the fact that King Vaughn lived that story. The power of Took Her to the O comes from the fact that O'Block was real, and Vaughn was from there, and everything he described had a factual basis in the world he actually inhabited. And Vaughn 1700, whatever his talents as a rapper, whatever his genuine connection to Chicago's drill ecosystem, cannot claim that same authenticity for himself by attaching Vaughn's name to his rap identity. Because authenticity is not contagious. It does not transfer through naming conventions or through careful brand construction or through consistent association with somebody else's verified credibility. It has to be earned independently. It has to come from your own story, your own history, your own documented presence in the world you claim to represent. And this is the argument that King Yella is making at its most fundamental level. Not that Vaughn 1700 is a bad rapper. Not that Big Jilla is not real or does not have his own credibility in Chicago. But that the specific move of building your entire public identity on a dead man's name, and then using that identity to make claims against people who actually knew that dead man, is a move that does not hold up under scrutiny. That falls apart the moment somebody with real knowledge of the situation decides to look at it directly. And King Yella, who is one of the few figures in this landscape who has consistent presence, consistent platform, and consistent willingness to say uncomfortable things out loud, King Yella is not going to let that vacuum be filled by people he does not believe have earned the right to fill it. That is the role he has assigned himself. Whether the community fully endorses that role or not, whether Chicago agrees with every specific judgment he makes or not, Yella is going to keep showing up and keep putting his assessments on the record. And his assessment of Vaughn 1700 is clear. Stop hiding behind Vaughn's name. Stop using a dead man's legacy as a shield for moves that Vaughn would not have sanctioned and cannot now deny or confirm. Build your own credibility on your own story. Or do not build it at all. But do not come at real people with borrowed credibility and expect it to hold up when somebody with actual receipts decides to push back. Now what does Big Jilla's role in all of this tell us? Because Big Jilla, Jilla 1500, is not just a random figure in this story. He is closely connected to Vaughn 1700, and his presence in the claim that sparked this public beef is significant. King Yella specifically responded to the claim that Big Jilla punched on him, directly denying it and calling the narrative cap. And the fact that Vaughn 1700 chose to make the Big Jilla physical claim the centerpiece of his attack on Yella tells you something about the strategy. It tells you that Vaughn 1700 understood that a physical credibility attack was his best option in a beef where the historical and authenticity arguments were not going to go his way. But the problem with that strategy is that it requires the claim to be believable. It requires the community to find it plausible that Big Jilla physically got the better of King Yella. And King Yella, with his history, his platform, his documented presence in Chicago rap for years, is not somebody whose physical credibility is easy to attack. Which is exactly why the claim fell flat. Why Chicago's reaction was more skepticism than acceptance. Why the IG Live confrontation between Yella and Vaughn 1700 ended with Yella's position looking stronger rather than weaker. And the broader lesson, the thing that this entire situation teaches anybody paying attention, is that in Chicago, you cannot manufacture credibility. You can borrow it temporarily. You can create the appearance of it through careful brand construction and strategic associations and the right name choices. But the moment somebody with real knowledge of the terrain decides to examine your foundation, the moment the borrowed credibility gets pressure tested against the actual historical record, the gaps become visible. The construction becomes obvious. And no amount of IG Live confrontation or Big Jilla claims is going to paper over those gaps once they have been exposed. King Yella exposed them. Publicly, directly, without apology. And Vaughn 1700 now has to decide what to do with an identity that has been called into question at its most fundamental level by somebody who is actually there for the era that identity is built upon. And that is the complete picture that nobody else assembled for you today. We went from Vaughn 1700 building his entire rap identity on King Vaughn's name, to the Big Jilla physical claim that sparked the public beef, to King Yella's immediate and forceful denial on the King Yella show, to the explosive IG Live confrontation that went viral across Chicago, to Yella's declaration that the GDBD war in Chirac is over, to the deeper question of who has the right to carry a dead man's name in a city that takes legacy this seriously, to what all of this means for Chicago. Rap in the post-Vaughn post-Dirk landscape of 2026. This is not just a rap beef. This is a conversation about authenticity. About legacy. About the responsibility that comes with carrying somebody's name when that somebody is no longer here to speak for themselves. And King Yella, whatever anybody thinks about his controversial statements over the years, is forcing that conversation in a way that needed to happen. So now I need to hear from you. Do you think Vaughn 1700 has the right to build his rap identity around King Vaughn's name, or is that disrespectful to Vaughn's legacy? Do you think the Big Jilla claim was a real account of what happened, or was it capped the way Yella says? Do you think King Yella's declaration that the GDBD war is over carries any real weight in Chicago, or is that wishful thinking? And most importantly, what do you think Vaughn himself would say about somebody using his name this way if he were still here? Drop everything in the comments right now. This community does not do surface level, and this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen out loud. We want your real take. Not the diplomatic version, the actual one. King Yella is still talking. Vaughn 1700 still has to answer. And Chicago is still waiting to see what happens next.